Recently, I've been talking a lot about Isekai anime as a result of a successful, but continually distressed by copyright, video on Mushoku Tensei. And in the comments of that video, a lot of people suggested I check out the similarly structured Sekai Saiko no Ansatsusha Isekai Kizoki ni Tensei Suru, or The World's Finest Assassin is Reincarnated in Another World as an Aristocrat. I marathoned the show and thought it was just okay. I would give it a 5 out of 10, and that's because even though it didn't face a number of the biggest problems that I had with Mushoku Tensei, I did find it limited in a way that I had also found that show to be, but to an even greater extent, thanks to its tendency to fixate on plot detail over story content. Now, plot and story are mostly used interchangeably in the English language, so I'm going to establish what I consider to be the difference between them when I use them. And it's an admittedly subtle difference that might seem like more of a spectrum from story to plot that I couldn't define with such consistent terms as to make one always recognizable from the other. But hopefully you will know what I mean after I break down this example. I actually think the first episode of Ansatsu Kizoku tells a pretty compelling story, which is brought to life by well-paced direction and storyboarding that only gets undercut by the overall cheap and generic aesthetic of the art style. When the scene first cranked into action mode, I did have a hard time taking it seriously because of the bright and simple character designs being pushed into such an incredibly gritty scenario. But at least I could feel that the director understood how the scene should play out to be cinematically interesting, even if the coat of paint on top of that doesn't draw out the full potential of quality thereof. Because the show opens by introducing us to the emotional state of the characters before gradually unfolding and redefining their situation through a twisting plot which keeps expanding in scope as it introduces all of the characters involved, it has a concrete through line of emotional storytelling that keeps the viewer engaged. We immediately empathize with these girls when we see their situation, and then we are instantly gratified when the would-be victims start mowing down crowds of evil rich people, and makes a great introduction to the kind of world that the main character inhabits leading into his actual appearance. It's the first big interaction that our assassin has with the girl that he's training where the plot details first begin to creep into the story. But at least here, most of them serve to bolster the clear emotional intentions of the scene, which is essentially for this guy to blackpill our audience stand-in character on just how crazy the world of assassination really is and how far she is from being on his level, even in spite of being in the top of her class in the organization. All of this ends up leading to the eventual trap our hero lands in that gets him killed, dying only with the regret that he had never really made his own decisions in life and always just allowed himself to be the perfect mechanism for the system that he was a part of, and promising that if he is to be reborn, he will be his own person and make his own decisions next time. Episode 2 has our hero, of course, being resurrected by a goddess, with the catch that he needs to assassinate the strongest person in this world's future, the hero, before his 18th birthday, after which the hero is meant to destroy the world right after having saved it for some reason. For clarification, Assassin asks the goddess if he absolutely must kill the hero or if it only matters that he prevents the end of the world. And the goddess supposes that it would just be the second option, thus inviting us to a scenario where our hero will really have the opportunity to circumvent the supposedly necessary duties assigned to him by way of ingenuity and non-total adherence to the demands of others in how he goes about doing things. That's all well and good, but that little story detail comes in the middle of an outright ocean of plot setup across episodes 2 and 3 that lays out every single aspect of the hero's abilities before actually giving him anything to do with them. And I had an incredibly hard time caring about any of it. All I kept thinking was, wow, I sure can't wait to see what that ability is going to mean contextually 10 episodes from now. And I was pretty much spot on with my estimate, as the bulk of all the plot details that have a payoff in this season came down exactly as I expected them to one huge pulverizing insta-kill technique used on a mid-boss before the hero is even introduced. When the scene actually happens, it flashes back to all of the relevant details that had been set up and explains how all that led to this moment. So I didn't really feel like I had missed anything by not catching everything that it was building up to that point. Now call it a bias, but I am a fan of writing which is dense in story content and light on establishing details. You can see this preference in the way I structure my videos. I rarely open with any kind of summary or production information, and instead I kind of drip feed that stuff into the script where I think it feels relevant to the story that I'm trying to tell. And I try to be sure that as many of my statements tell some kind of story in and of themselves in how they contribute to the tapestry of the story at large. There is story content in the second and third episodes of Ansatsu Kizoku, but it is so thinly spread across all of these explanations for how and why things work that I felt like I learned almost nothing about the actual story in the course of those episodes. Aside from the overarching idea that the main character would eventually have to kill the hero, I couldn't even tell what kind of show this was going to be on the whole until a few more episodes in, when it introduced the rest of its main cast and started to settle into actually moving the world forward. A couple of things are shocking to me about the structure of this series. Firstly, that it managed to rip off the structure of Mushoku Tensei so closely, and secondly, that so many audience members actually have the patience for these painfully slow-moving stories. Then again, I've seen a lot of viewers describe Mushoku Tensei as being fast-paced because of how it covers such a large amount of the main character's life in the course of its episodes. But the thing is, barely anything actually happens over the course of all those years. It took Rudius to the end of the second episode to even leave his fucking house. Frodo Baggins left the fucking Shire earlier in The Lord of the Rings, and even the film version of that had been packed with so many characters and details by comparison that it makes Mushoku Tensei feel slim for the picking, and I still thought the Shire scene was long-winded and boring when I first saw it when I was like 12. And yes, I understand that not everyone has ADHD, but it is what it is, and I can't handle watching these shows at regular speed. But I do suspect that Ansatsu Kizoku will actually be more accessible to younger audiences than Mushoku Tensei was, depending on their relationship to sexuality. I actually could see having been a big fan of this show when I was younger, just because it does have action scenes in it, and when I remember that I watched like 15 episodes of Samurai Deeper Kyo back then just because it had samurai in it, even though I retained absolutely nothing I saw, I have a hard time thinking I wouldn't have actually been a bigger fan of this show than I was of that one at the very least. As a power fantasy, this show is absolutely ridiculous, and actually more closely resembles the plot of a hentai or even Shumatsu no Harem than even Mushoku Tensei did. Most of the middle episodes exist to establish the main character's stable of waifus, two of whom are sharing his bed and cock by the time he's like 13, even though he openly considers them as secondaries to his true love, whom he manages to hook up with by season's end. Actually, the most commendable thing to me about this show is that its author creates a convincingly perfect main character by giving him a sociopathic understanding of how to be charismatic and noble at all times, and yet a heroic inclination to save people from horrible situations. He's as dark as he could be while also being as plainly heroic as he could be at the same time. And the only thing you could charge him with as a flaw is that he's got no personality and is therefore insanely boring. Each of his hanger-ons is a beautiful girl who was in a horrible situation that glued themselves to him after being rescued and has no more personality traits than any hentai manga character I could think of. It's actually kind of baffling how intense the situations ought to be for the characters emotionally compared to how reserved and unemotive the series feels overall. It does have its moments of actual character intrigue, my favorite probably being when Lou breaks a tough guy's arm at a party and then butters him up to enter his employ as a knight later on, but I never had anything close to a shadow of a doubt that the main character's ability to coldly calculate a solution to any situation he found himself in would abate any serious consequences for any important characters. All of that is not necessarily a problem, though, and in fact, I think it's part of the show's appeal to be a cold and calculating scenario-driven drama. After all, the assassin character is immediately presented as aspirational, not only to audiences, but to pretty much every character in the show. So he's basically like a superhero with a stupidly detailed, uninteresting origin story that's explained at excruciating length before he does anything truly relevant. The last two episodes open and shut a short drama surrounding Lou having to pretend to assassinate his waifu and fight off a strong bad guy, and then the very last frames of the show finally introduce his actual rival, the hero, and the only other character who actually matters to the establishing text of the story. It's not that I think any of the story or plot details that we got between episode 1 and episode 12 are bad or inconsistent or broken, they're just mostly very banal and boring. I don't mind the escapist biggest power fantasy elements of the story, but even those feel so underexplored by the season's end that I don't even feel like I've cracked a full understanding of the fetishes being played to here to the extent that I had Mushoku Tensei. In spite of multiple episodes that feature sexual slavery as a theme, a bunch of very attractive characters occasionally in revealing outfits are shown naked, and often outright all over Lou's crotch, there isn't actually a lot of blatant fan service in the show, and what's there isn't given nearly the focus and detail that Mushoku Tensei gave its sexuality. It ends up feeling like the sexual component of the story actually had very little thought put into it, and like the author just favors romantic relationships to be as uncomplicated as possible. By far the biggest fetishistic undercurrent I picked up on was that the main character's own mom is way too into him and wants to see his erect dick after hearing about it from his childhood friend's sister wives. His main waifu is also eventually revealed to be related to his mother, and after they fake her assassination, they decide to assimilate her into the family and call her Lou's younger sister. This is after they've already had sex, mind you. I get the feeling that the author of this series has a bit of a mommy complex, and maybe hasn't really experienced a kind of love besides the obsessively protective love from a suspiciously caring mother. Even if I can pick themes and implications out of the story though, I don't feel like I've really made any progress with these characters by the end of the season. Lou is perfect at the start and perfect at the end. Every girl loves him as soon as they meet him and loves him even more every time he does anything. Sometimes other people in the world take sillier actions that have negative consequences for the characters, but if those are anyone whom Lou cares about, he will quickly abate any concerns for their safety. It feels like every time something threatens to happen, Lou kills it before it has time to find legs. In this way, I do find Ansatsu Kizoku somewhat unique. Almost every other isekai anime I can think of chooses to focus on a relatable character that the audience is meant to see themselves in, so that they can see a version of themselves being rebuilt into a greater person in their next life, either through growing as a person like Rudeus from Mushoku Tensei, or through using the knowledge and personality that they already had to help resolve conflicts and shape the state of the world, like in Log Horizon, Outbreak Company, or Slime Isekai. Ansatsu Kizoku is closer to the latter type of show, but instead of supposing systems through which regular people could express the true power of their latent knowledge and personality, it supposes a character who is just so incredibly good at life that you could put him into any situation and he'll handle it perfectly. I think it's honestly more fair to consider it like a slice of life rebirth isekai take on James Bond than a typical rebirth isekai narrative. Even so, the best Bond films all combine brisk plot setup, engaging story content, and most importantly, truly impressive action sequences, which Ansatsu Kizoku can't afford anywhere close to the level that even Mushoku Tensei could. I think that held it back for me just as much as the milquetoast plot-heavy writing, and in the end, I didn't find myself engaging with the characters or setting enough to imagine coming back for another season of this like I did that show. If you think I missed some aspect of this show's appeal though, let me know about it in the comments and share your thoughts about the ideal balance of story and plot for you. Do you think this is a very noticeable difference? Can you think of shows where you loved aspects of the story but didn't think the plot was interesting, or vice versa? Subscribe to my channel so that you'll be able to see more videos like this, and to catch one of my frequent live streams where I play in the Chow Garden. Find more of my writing on goldenwitch.substack.com and subscribe for bonus articles and podcasts, or subscribe to patreon.com/goldenwitchfire for the same podcasts. Find my music reviews on the Whatcha Reviewin' channel, and listen to the new podcast I've got, the New Void Gazers podcast, with my friends over on the ASE Presents channel. I'm at goldenwitchfire on all social media and payment platforms, and I'm reminding you to never forget anime forever.